Hello and welcome. It's a very great pleasure to introduce you to Alex Brothwood, who is the business manager for Lumicon, which is one of the UK organisations which help businesses, small and large, to handle the waste, particularly electronic waste to do with lighting, that we all generate when we create a luminaire or when we retrofit a luminaire. So Alex's background is in electronics, but he's also done all kinds of other things. But now he's going to talk to us about how we can make sure that what we do complies with all the regulations in a way that's both safe and affordable. So Alex, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about this WE directive that we hear about and what we need to do to comply and how you can help us.
Yep, so Lumicon is a producer compliance scheme under the WE directive. When you're placing electronic goods on the UK market, you have an obligation to recycle that at end of life. Lumicon is a producer compliance scheme that is set up to look after large producers' obligation. When you place a product on the market, you have a responsibility to fund the recycling of that product at end of life. If you place more than 5 tons on the market, you're classed as a large producer, and therefore you need to register with a producer compliance scheme such as Lumicon. There's several of those throughout the UK. Lumicon obviously specialises in lighting, and we were set up by the Lighting Industry Federation back when the WE directive started in 2005, and then with the merger of LIF and the Lighting Association into the Lighting Industry Association, Lumicon was brought under that umbrella, and we're part of the Lighting Industry Association. And we look after our members' obligation to recycle at end of life. So when you place products on the market, you have an obligation to recycle that at end of life and to fund that. Like I said, it's done on weight. So if you place more than 5 tons, you're a large producer and must register with the producer compliance scheme. If you're under 5 tons, you're classed as a small producer and therefore can register directly with the Environment Agency.
Okay, so how do we go about doing that? And when you say 5 tons, is that, so imagine that I'm working with a wonderful client at the moment who makes ceramic wall pieces, and
Yep.
we're installing LEDs inside those wall pieces. So which bit of that is part of my 5 tons?
It's anything that would go in the box. So you ignore packaging and batteries, because batteries obviously have fallen under their own directive, under the battery directive. So anything that would go in the box. If you say you're doing a table lamp and you sell a range of shades, if they're sold as a separate item, then you don't need to report that weight because it's the actual electrical unit. So a shade is not electrical unit, so therefore that doesn't need to be included. If it's obviously a fixed shade, so you can't, it's not use replaceable, therefore you would have to include that shade in the weight. So it's everything that would go in the box for the 1 unit.
So for example, I bought the LED strip from another supplier. So
Yeah.
where do we, and then I'm going to install it in there and we're going to fix it so that it doesn't fall out and so that it's safe. So do I then take on the minute I fix it into something new and sell it something new, do I then take on that responsibility?
You do, yes. So it's when you make it available to the end user. So obviously, if you're buying an LED strip, that is a component. It's not an actual electrical fitting. So yeah, you're buying a component and then you're putting it into a final product. It's when the final product is made available for purchase in the UK. Okay. So that's when it becomes E, so electronic equipment, and therefore you have to report that to the EA to say you placed that electrical good on the market.
Okay, so I've bought these LED strips and I put them into my luminaire. If I simply have them as something that because I don't buy big enough volume to buy something trade or buy the chips in. If I just supplied a plug and said put your own LED strips in, the responsibility would remain with the person who sold, because I guess I'm the end user.
No, it would still be you because you're selling. You'd only need to report the plug and the electronics. If you're getting them to do it themselves to an end user, then that you're selling the electrical good and placing it on the market.
Okay, fine. Okay.
So you'd only have to do the plug and the actual electronic thing. So if you think of a pendant fitting, so it's a cable and a light lamp holder, possibly a lamp. That is still an electrical good that you're selling to the end user. So that even if you sell it to a contractor, who's installing it in a building, that's still the end user technically, because it's made purchase. Anybody could buy it. So yeah, it's.
Okay. So then I'm just going to ask you another kind of scenario, and then we'll just talk about how you then go about reporting that. So let's imagine that I'm retrofitting and working with another client who wants to kind of restore some beautiful old lamps. And so I'm putting new wires in, putting new lamp holders in, and kind of wiring them up, testing them. So, and I can imagine there's lots of markets around which kind of upcycle all kinds of kind of crazy things and make them into lamps. So does that, there are two things. I guess it means that when I sell that product, whatever I've done, I will have, I'll need to comply. But then what about the things that, the old manky old cables that I've just taken out of the luminaire that's so where do I get rid of that? How does that work?
Okay, well, in most of the scenarios of that would have been a B2C, a business to consumer sale. So therefore it'd be a B2C unit. B2C, small producers don't have an obligation to recycle that. So you have zero obligation for B2C. All you need to do is register with the EA, report any sales that you're doing. But because it's going into a household, so business to consumer, not necessarily always going to a household. It could go into a hotel, but it's in that market. What then the onus is on the end user, and they can take it to a civic community site or a designated collection facility, and there should be some type of local council area where they can take that to be recycled. So that's the B2C market. If it's a B2B product, then the onerous, the obligation to recycle is actually on the producer, so whoever's creating it. And that actually, you'd have to fund that yourself, because there's no way within the small producer scheme to fund that collection. Obviously, if you're a large producer, you go to producer compliance scheme, and they will look after your obligation on your behalf. As a small producer, you wouldn't, and you'd have to fund that yourself.
So as a spark, sort of kind of renovating lamps, my client asked me to come in and renovate some lamps. So I bought some stuff from Screwfix. I've gone along, and so I've used some new cabling and some new lamp holders, and that's then I need to be registered because I'm then, I suppose, essentially selling.
Actually, in that sense, you wouldn't need to be, because you're reusing E. So it's only when it's first placed on the market. So that electrical good that you first placed on the market was then reported. If you're taking it back for reuse, that E never becomes WE, because you're reusing it, upcycling it, and complying with it.
But I'm only upcycling the physical kind of lamp kind of base. The rest of it is
but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because that ease up, that product has already been placed on the market. All you're doing is you're repairing it, reusing that product. Therefore, it never comes off the market to be WE. Therefore, it's not a new product going back on the market. So you don't actually have to report that. It's reuse. There's a lot of talk about it at the moment about being able to determine what is E and what is WE. If you're taking it off the market and upcycling it and then put it back on the market, that never becomes WE. So therefore, there's never an obligation for you to recycle that, and it still technically falls on the original manufacturer of that product to recycle that at end of life.
So if I simply help my client to in her house or in her hotel or restaurant, if I simply help her to reuse a lampshade or a lamp base or something, it doesn't, that unit doesn't come off the market, and I don't sell it again, and so it doesn't need to. That doesn't me. Okay.
So that's not actually you placing a product on the market, because it's already been placed on the market. You're just repairing it in essence.
Okay, got it. And then what about if in doing that, a lot of people are, I'm retrofitting a lot of LED lamps for old halogens and things like that. So what about all of that, or old transformers, all of that stuff, how does that work?
It's a very grey area, and there's a lot of discussion in the EA around this. But technically, obviously, if you're selling a kit for people to do it themselves, then obviously you're placing that kit on the market. So therefore, you wouldn't report the Category 5 luminaire. You would report the Category 9 control gear. So the LED driver and the Cat 13 LED strip, which is the lamp. So you'd be placing those products on the market, but you wouldn't be placing a Category 5 lighting equipment product on the market, because you're not actually creating a luminaire in essence, because that luminaire already exists on the market.
Okay, so I go along and or any of us go, we sort of retrofit and kind of end up upcycling or upgrading something.
Yeah.
Then and at the end of the job, end of the day, there's a whole pile of redundant kit, bits of cable, bits of transformer, and there's no requirement on me, who's kind of bought them and put them in, to do anything about that. And what about you?
No, there isn't. And I actually had a discussion with the EA yesterday regarding this, what the obligation is around small producers, for recycling the products at end of life. And all your obligation as a small producer, so someone placing under 5 tons on the market, is to register with the EA, report what you're selling to them on an annual basis, and to fund any B2B collection activity yourself. For business to consumer markets, which most of this type of stuff is, most things that could go into a house are classed as either B2C or dual use, and therefore are B2C. So it's household products, and therefore there is no obligation. It's up to the end user to dispose of and take it to a civic community site to be recycled correctly.
But I think what you also, because I mean, certainly here in central London, to sort of get to a civic community centre is frankly kind of a nightmare. So for example, if it's there, I can see the brand on the thing that's Philips. I mean, could I take that back to Rhiness, or there are other brands out there, to a place which sells electrical lamps and things? Would they be a place where I could take stuff back?
So there's distributors and wholesalers and things like that have, under the WEEE directive, have an obligation to do a 1-for-1 take-back scheme. So they have an obligation to offer that service, and they can opt out of it under the distributor take-back scheme. So what they do is they pay a amount of money to the EA, and the EA will then look after that obligation, and that money is then used to fund civic community sites and make sure services are available. That is actually that actually ends the end of this year. And we're in phase 5 of seeing if it's going to be redone. So at the end of the year, we're going to know whether that's going to continue. If not, then all wholesalers will have to offer this type of service. If you think of Currys, if you buy a washing machine from them, they will take the old one away for you and recycle it. And that's the distributor take-back scheme, distributor take-back service. And all wholesalers should offer that service.
In that situation, though, they are going to sell you a new one. So I'm just thinking that I've just taken out a load of lamps from a house or from an exhibition, and I don't want to buy any new ones. I just want to get rid of these ones. So
unfortunately, as a small producer, because they're coming from a household, at the moment, the only way to get that recycled, there are talks within the EA to offer better coverage and services, but would be to take it to a local
community centre,
civic community sites. And they should have lamp containers on there, which you, as a member of the general public, are able to take those there and get them disposed of.
I see. Okay. So my kind of dreams of going back to Rhiness and saying, I don't know who bought these, but I don't need them anymore. There isn't sort of a giant recycling scheme that's going through.
No, unfortunately, especially for lamps, because most lamps are B2C, because anybody can buy lamps. Most of them have to go are B2C, and therefore the obligation for the business to collect them and recycle them, that's what funds the civic community sites, and that's where that money goes, is collection.
So if I buy my lamps online, I can't say you can have these ones back. They're not.
Online retailers are, they're trying to avoid being compliant under the WEEE directive because they're mostly distance selling it. There's a lot of talk around online retailers and having to offer these types of services for the take back schemes.
Because it just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, 99% of what I do certainly is online, because I can't find anywhere with the range of, I mean, the number of the different bases, the number.
No, completely understand that. And actually, going back to your comments regarding the upscaling of products and going into places to redo this, whoever you buy that control gear from, that you're then putting into there, they're the ones that are actually putting the product on the market for sale. So in that situation, yourselves wouldn't have any obligation at all under the WEEE directive, because you're the end user in essence. So buying from these online retailers, it's them producers that should be registered and should be reporting that. And I mean, you can always contact them. So say you do have a Philips lamp, you can contact Philips and they will then point you in the direction of a producer compliance scheme, because obviously they're a large producer who looks after their waste. So then you would obviously speak to either Lumicon or another producer compliance scheme in the UK, and they should be able to point you in the right direction of where you can get things recycled, because civic community sites are always the best, and a lot of PCS has set up other collection points around the UK where you can do drop-offs and stuff.
Okay, so it sounds as though a little bit of planning ahead and buying from a reputable supplier.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, certainly, I really want to do the right thing.
We all do, and so on the government website, there's actually a EEE producer register.
Okay.
It's a public register, and that shows you all of the registered manufacturers under the WEEE directive and who their producer compliance scheme they're registered with. So if you say you've got a Zumtobel fitting, you'd go onto this Excel sheet, scroll down, find Zumtobel right at the bottom, obviously Z, go across, and you'll see that their producer compliance scheme is Lumicon. So therefore, you could contact Lumicon and say, I've got all this waste. It's Zumtobel products. Can you come collect it for us? And Lumicon will come and collect it for you on behalf of Zumtobel. And that's how it should work for other producers as well. With other producers.
Okay, so that's another reason to be careful what you buy. There's another interview about kind of buying, making sure that I mean, you get what you pay for essentially, and in terms of kind of environmental responsibility, that clearly is the case as well.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So we've kind of pretty much run out of time. So I just wanted to check if you you mentioned that you could register. Certainly, someone like myself, I'm going to register.
So
what's
if
that
you're
called?
placing under 5 tons on the market, you can register as a small producer, and to do that, you would go to the National Waste Packaging Database, so NWPD. And on there, there's the packaging, batteries, and WEEE areas. And you go onto those and you register, and it's a £30 annual fee. And all you have to do, like I said, your obligation is to report what you're placing on market in weight on an annual basis. And that is all your obligation under the WEEE directive.
And that £30 will cover sort of a small contribution to kind of end of life upcycling and taking care of the waste.
So it's all it is to manage and look after your obligation under B2C, and like you said, B2B stuff. Unfortunately, the onus falls back on yourselves to look after that and fund that. The end users, the business isn't entitled to a free collection, so you can charge them to collect that waste, but then obviously you'd have to find an environmentally sound way of disposing that.
Right.
And that all unfortunately falls upon yourself as a small producer to manage that.
Okay, that's great. And so I suppose as one of the things for my clients, knowing that I am a member of that scheme is a plus if they're interested in the environmental.
Well, you'll be on that register. the public register, it'll say you're a direct registrant to say that you're covered under WEEN, you're doing your part, reporting your products placed on markets.
That sounds like a really good, sounds like a really worthwhile thing to do. £30 a year is a little bit to pay to make sure that we are doing what we can in the sector to do more responsibility. And then I guess when we get up to 5 tons or more, you're the man to talk to. And thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to just kind of share as links or anything else?
No, other than the National Waste Packaging Database, that's the go-to place. That's got all the information and where you lets you register, and then obviously the government website for the that lets you know where the public registers are. It tells you where the treatment facilities are, so the AATF. So if you do have a business obligation, it'll tell you where the best places to go to get that recycled properly. Has all of the producer compliance schemes on there. So if you do go over 5 tons, you have 28 days within a year period, January to December, to register with a PCS as soon as you go over that 5 tons. And that gives you the list there. And then obviously gives you the list of all the manufacturers who are registered under the WEEE directive.
That was fascinating and really informative. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, can't thank you enough. So your website is lumicon.co.uk. So Alex, thank you again.
Bye now. Thank you.